Congressman's question.
That's a question for observers. The gentleman from North Dakota, Ms. Armstrong.
Mr. Whitaker, you've obviously been acting Attorney General during some fairly interesting times, and we've heard a lot about that today. But I also want to commend the Department of Justice, the FBI, the White House, and all other law enforcement who was involved in the First Step Act. This is a tremendous shift, not just for the Department of Justice, not just for Republicans, and not just for Democrats. And it's the way government's supposed to work. It's supposed to show redemption, tough on traffickers, organized crime, and also work towards a smarter way to deliver criminal justice, particularly with addiction-related crimes. So my only hope is that because it is called the First Step Act, there will be a second step. And if you ever, unfortunately, I have some other questions for you. So anytime on your way out, if you have any advice on something Congress can do to continue this momentum, I would be very, very appreciative.
Well, you know, Congressman, I was involved on behalf of the Department of Justice in the First Step Act, and I just want to commend everyone on this committee that worked on the First Step Act to successfully get that passed and to get it through both the House and the Senate. I actually know how difficult that is. I think one of the things that we could use your help on is to make sure you fund the First Step Act and what you've requested the Department of Justice to do. You know, we continue to implement the First Step Act consistent with the law that you passed. And in fact, just last night, we sent out guidance to our U.S. Attorney's offices out of how to implement the First Step Act. And I know that the Bureau of Prisons as well is implementing the act.
And I would hope to work towards having a federal level pretrial release program to be available to every state and county courthouse across the country, because one of the great ironies I've always found about your pretrial release program is it is incredibly effective, and then you get a 10-year minimum mandatory. So the pretrial release program at the Department of Justice and U.S. Attorney's offices across this country is phenomenal, and they deserve to be credited for that.
And as a former United States attorney for 5.5 years in Des Moines, Iowa, I understand uniquely how pretrial release works. And so we'd be interested in your proposal, and we'll look at that and work with you carefully to try to implement something like that.
Now, in our role as Oversight, I do actually have a question about something that has come up in the past, and that, given the nature of the testimony today, very, very possibly could come up in the future. And I think often when we have names like Clinton and Comey and Rosenstein and Trump and Mueller and Russia, we forget that the law is the law. You testified earlier to Representative Jordan that we prosecute crimes, not people. And I think often across this country, we think laws apply differently to people depending on their status. And one of the areas where this came up, and it was something that concerned me before I was involved in this, is when we started talking about the difference between gross negligence and intent. And it was in a very particular statute, and we were dealing with it, and there were members of the FBI and the DOJ that said that were concerned about vagueness. But as far as I understand in the federal code, particularly the federal criminal code, gross negligence has the same definition approximately everywhere in the criminal code, right?
In my experience, your statement is generally correct, yes.
So if gross negligence would be vague under one particular statute of the criminal code, then we should be concerned that it's vague under every other other section of the criminal code.
That is correct. And there's, for example, jury instructions that would say, inform a jury as to how to evaluate a gross negligence standard to convict someone of a crime.
And assuming that it wasn't political in nature as to why gross negligence wasn't looked forward in any particular case, under your leadership, under the DOJ, has anybody reviewed this, looked at it, and made any proposals to Congress, particularly regarding whether or not we need to tighten up gross negligence language, not just, let's say, in the Espionage Act, but in any section of the federal criminal code?
As I sit here right now, I don't know the answer to your question, but I'd be happy to get back to you on that.
I'd appreciate that. And then I'm just, again, under normal course of order, I'm assuming it works the same as everywhere. Law enforcement agents, and I know a lot of FBI agents actually do have law degrees, but FBI agents investigate crimes, and then it goes up the food chain to the U.S. Attorney's Office, usually, maybe.
Remember, I mean, you need a predication to even open an investigation, and that's the step that I think a lot of people forget. I mean, there's many steps along the way, and when you conduct a criminal investigation, first you have to predicate the investigation. Then it's investigated by the special agents that investigate the crimes. Typically, an AUSA works with them to get search warrants and the like, and then ultimately a case is developed and presented to a grand jury, and that is charged. So I mean, that's typical. And then again, there's a discovery process and a trial process. It's a very well worn, and to go back to something you mentioned earlier, Congressman. All of that is done at the Department of Justice without improper interference or interference based on a political nature.
Well, I'm just concerned moving forward that we have the same, I mean, everybody knows, and obviously this is hypertension and hyper-political, but I'm very concerned moving forward that everybody knows what the rules of the game are as far as statutes are, and that the law is actually applied in the way the law should be applied, because I do believe in the past it has not been, and obviously this is continuing to go on. This hearing today is noticeable of that. So on your way out, maybe it's the best time to deal with some of those things, because sometimes that's when we have the courage to do it. But this could very much come up again in the future.
Thank you, Congressman.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The committee will stand in recess for 2 minutes. I ask that the members remain here if they can.